Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. This is your weekly dose of inspiration where we bring you some tools about how to live your best life for you and your families, practical tools and inspiration for you. And today we are going to be talking to someone who knows a lot about bringing you some practical inspiration, and that is Amber Todd. Hello. She is from Life Interconnected, where she offers courses and counseling. She also has a podcast, Life Interconnected. So we're going to be finding out more about that and some of her tips about for people who are feeling overwhelmed and burned out. Hello.
Hi.
So nice to talk with you.
Yes, it's nice to be here live with you as well. Thank you for having me.
Yes, well, thank you for taking the time to join us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So my name is Amber Todd, and I am an integrative Christian counselor. And so what that means is that the way I approach counseling is really from a holistic perspective that incorporates mental, physical, and spiritual health. That's the whole premise behind Life Interconnected, is that I believe that all parts of our being are connected. And in the way that we approach something like counseling, I think we really need to take into consideration the whole person. And so I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of your community for today.
Well, thank you. And I love this approach that you have. We're going to get into that a little bit more in a bit, but I know one of the things that is important to you is helping people on their journey to overcome emotional overwhelm and seek inner peace. But I'm curious, where does your passion for doing this work come from?
Yeah, I think, in my own journey, I have been through a lot of my healing and realized over time of pursuing healing myself from growing up in some family dysfunction, growing up as the daughter of an alcoholic. I think my healing journey required me to seek a lot of different resources. And, typically when we're struggling mentally, we think, okay, I need to go see a counselor. Or if we're struggling physically in our bodies or with symptoms, we go see a doctor. If we're wrestling with big questions about our faith or our spirituality, we might seek out a pastor or a priest or a mentor. And so that has been my journey. It's been seeking out a lot of different professionals and mentors over the years who've helped put all of my healing puzzle pieces together. And when I began thinking about counseling, it was actually a result of my own healing, because I grew up wanting to be a doctor, and I grew up wanting to pursue medicine and felt like I was called to help people heal physically. But as I had this big aha moment in healing for myself as a freshman in college, I realized, you know what, it's not just physical, it's actually emotional and spiritual. And so that was a part of my journey. And as I began pursuing counseling, I realized, you know what, most counseling programs that I know of only focused on one part of our being. They only focused on the mental health and on the mind. And I just didn't think it was possible to segment myself in that way. And that's really how we approach medicine, is that, if your hand hurts, you go to a hand doctor. Or if you get, I was getting headaches when I was working in crisis response, and I went to get an MRI. But in my process, I realized it was stress induced. And so all of that being said, I'm just really passionate about understanding our symptoms and our experiences through the lens of being a whole person. I think practitioners really need more of that understanding too.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, because like you said, what your approach is all about integrating our mental, physical, and spiritual health. Why is that so different? I mean, you kind of touched on this already, but could you talk a little bit more about what makes that so different and why it's so helpful to talk about those together? Like you said, to really look at the whole
Yeah.
person.
So I think, and again, it's unique because if we're talking about a Western culture paradigm, and I say Western culture because in America, the way that we train people and the way that we go about health and healing is very compartmental. Traditional Western culture is you have medical schools, you have seminary, you have, grad school for counseling. But I began my own path of really learning about this integrative experience. And from fairly early on in my private practice, I started offering counseling in collaboration with doctors, because I felt like I'm seeing one part of the person's journey, but you're seeing a whole other part. And if we could communicate about their healing with their permission, if we could collaborate, then we would both be able to better serve them. And so that has been a really eye-opening experience for me, especially these last few years. I have offered services primarily for pregnant and postpartum moms out of a birth center, collaborating with 5 OBs, 5 midwives, understanding and seeing women go through even, I'll back up even further, sometimes infertility and that whole journey that comes with that to becoming pregnant and then going through postpartum. And the fact that I could walk down the hallway and have a conversation with an OB or a midwife or even a physical therapist or a nutritionist about what was going on in her whole system and be able to serve her more holistically, I felt like I was able to better care for her as a counselor as well. And so I think a part of the journey has been learning and collaborating with at least practitioners who are open-minded. Even if they didn't have that type of training, they've been open to learning from one another. And I feel like that's helped develop really my well-rounded approach.
I love that. I mean, I think for most of it, that when, as you're talking about it, it just makes so much sense. I mean, like intuitively, we know that if we have something wrong with us physically, that affects us emotionally as we're trying to deal with it. Or like you gave the example about your stress-induced headaches. I mean, many of us have experienced something similar. So it makes sense. But like you said, our system's really not set up to deal with that. And one of the things that you've also talked to, I love that you're so open talking about your own journey, you know, in healing, and that something that was kind of a perspective shift for you was that when you were feeling most overwhelmed, you had to learn not to push harder, but to slow down and really intentionally invest in your overall health. What did that actually look like for you, and how does that help with burnout?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in my personality, and again, you'll see this in the dynamic of families of addicts, there tends to be the hero or the person who kind of holds things together. I'm the oldest child. I was the one who was reliable. And really, out of that birth, this feeling of being a performer or a achiever. If you're into the Enneagram, like a 3 on the Enneagram. And I think through that, I was sort of always the person that could do it. I was competent, capable, could handle a lot until I couldn't. And maybe some of you listening can relate where you're good, you can handle one more thing and still having a mental breakdown. And I think for me, a part of it was realizing, you know what, my body's actually giving me signs that I'm on overload that I've been ignoring. And for me, what that looks like is I might start having chest pains, or, you know, when I was working in crisis response and said, sure, I can do one more call. Sure, I can do one more thing. My eyes started twitching. I even got to a point where my hair was falling out. And at that point, I knew, like, you know what, my body is screaming at me that my stress level is beyond my capacity. And in my mind, my willpower is trying to override that. But I need to actually slow down and listen to my body, because our bodies don't lie. We can deceive our minds of what our capacity is, but our bodies don't lie. And so I think a part of when you ask about overload or overwhelm, it's, are we willing to slow down and listen to really make changes in response to that?
Yeah, there's a book, and I can't remember the name of the author, but it's someone who
The body keeps
I think
the score.
the body keeps the
Yes,
score.
Bessel van der Kolk. Yeah.
Yes, and that makes sense. Like you said, the body doesn't lie. The body remembers what we've been through, and often is the one that kind of bears the brunt of us not listening to when we need to slow down.
Yeah.
And it feels like we have kind of an epidemic about mothers especially feeling burned out and overwhelmed, and also feeling very isolated and alone. And you have said, I love how you put it, you said motherhood is hard and it's a phase of life we were never meant to live alone. Why is community so important when we're trying to adjust? Well, I mean, particularly motherhood, but just in general for what we're going through, why is having a supportive community so important?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that we were made for connection. We were built for relationship. And we live in a culture that has pushed us more and more to isolation and independence. Literally, we live in a country that praises independence. I can do it myself. I got it. I don't need you. But yet, I think one of the greatest signs of strength is the humility and the vulnerability to say, I really need you. I need help. And for me, again, as a performer, achiever, that's hard. That took a lot of swallowing my pride to recognize I feel vulnerable. in myself, I can no longer meet the demand around me. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about teaching, specifically postpartum moms, is how are you building your support system? There's 5 key relationships I think every, postpartum mom needs to be aware of. The relationship with your spouse, your family, your friends, your proximity people. So who are the people across the street that you can walk to in a moment of vulnerability? I remember being a postpartum mom with my second baby. My hair was a hot mess. My house was a disaster. I just snapped at my toddler and I literally felt like I was falling apart. And I walked across the street sobbing to my neighbor, Lindsay. And she opened the door, saw me sobbing. I was holding the baby with my toddler. And she just looked at me and she's like, I'll keep Emma for dinner. Why don't you go take a nap?
Mm.
And because I was willing to be vulnerable in my journey, because she knew all the hard things I had been through, I didn't have to carry on in that moment. I didn't have to explain myself. Like she just welcomed my kids with open arms, and I gave myself permission to rest, that it was okay to not be perfect. It was okay to unravel, and it was okay to be witnessed in that. And so I think the answer to why we need community, we need people to witness our vulnerability and to know that we're loved even when we don't have it together, and even when we can't push through in ourselves, that we literally are designed to depend on other people.
I love that because, like you said, that's such a shift in our perspective when we're really raised to be independent and to handle it and to figure it out, to just to get through it. And it was interesting when you were going through the relationships. I was thinking about my own life and people I know. I think the proximity ones are ones that are really lacking. I have very close friends and people I feel like I can be vulnerable with, but I don't really know my neighbors very well.
Yeah.
Like we might wave to each other, but I can't imagine walking across the street with my kids to one of my neighbors. So, which would be amazing if I could, because like you said, they're right there and probably would be willing to help if we actually reach it out to them.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I talk to clients about this a lot because, it's easy to look on social media and see everyone else connected and being social and going to all these things, and they were invited to that party, and we just think it happened. Like all these other people have close relationships, and I'm isolated. And there's a book that I love by Jenny Allen called Find Your People. And in that book, she talks about the research behind what is required to have a deep relationship. And the research shows that it's over 200 logged hours
Hmm.
of time, like quality time, which if you like do the math, it takes intention. So that relationship with her didn't happen overnight. It started the first day I met her. She walked across the street and I saw she had 2 girls. I had just had my second daughter. My house was a disaster. I think I had laundry all over the couch. I think I had dishes everywhere. And I decided in that moment, I want to be fully seen and known for where I'm at. And so I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to say, hey, do you want to come in? I just moved into the neighborhood. And I felt like if I could let me my mess from the beginning, then I could be authentic.
Mm.
And that's where our relationship started. And I think that's where meaningful relationships grow, is when we're able to be authentic and vulnerable and be seen just as we are and not feel like we have to hide, which can be hard with neighbors, right? Because literally they're right there and they might hear you raise your voice, or they might see
Yes.
you have conflict with your spouse. But if we can invite people into that and build the relationship, that can also be some of the most life-giving relationships that are accessible.
I love that. And you're right. I mean, it seems like there's so much potential there because they do see us in a lot of our a lot of our maybe not our best moments. What are I'm curious because you do so much counseling work and with people dealing with people in a lot of different situations. What are some of the most common problems that people come to you with, or the types of problems?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's that's a tough question because I feel like there's many different things and reasons that drive people to counseling.
Mm.
I would say in terms of most common issues that I see right now, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, depression, and just the sense of not feeling like yourself, or the reality is the demand around you exceeds your capacity. And that's really the definition of stress. And it could be what you're expecting of yourself. You could be that perfectionist expecting a certain standard of your house or the things you commit to, or what you're involved with, but this is your capacity in the season of life, especially for moms. When we have children, it's really hard to admit that we can't do what we've always done before. And by being able to embrace that, we can then integrate into our new season of life. But when we don't integrate, what we experience is typically stress and overwhelm. And when we don't address stress and overwhelm in real time, it builds up into anxiety, which then can turn into panic attacks, which might eventually turn into a sense of overwhelm and depression. Not always in that order, but to me, if someone's presenting an emotional symptom, I always say, emotions aren't the problem, emotions are messengers.
Mm,
So if someone's coming to me with something like anxiety or depression, I'm saying, okay, that's your system telling us that you're living beyond your capacity right now.
right.
So how can we start to listen to that and honor it and unpack it? And that's really how I approach kind of the mind, body, spirit piece of counseling.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I'm gonna have to remember that with my kids too, because we talk a lot about, handling big emotions, but I like that idea that the emotions aren't the problem. It's what are they telling us?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
one of the other aspects of what you do is helping people find fulfillment and direction in life.
Mm-hmm.
And as you put it, like discover the gifts that they already have inside
Yeah.
them. So when you meet somebody who's struggling and they feel like they don't really know what their purpose is, what are your top tips to help somebody when they're really struggling in that way?
Yeah. I love career counseling. I used to be a college advisor, and I just love the process of what I call excavation. So that just means I'm helping people discover what's already inside of them. Because most people who are seeking out some type of purpose or direction, guidance, they think it's a yellow brick road. I need to find this magical path where I'm going to look for something outside of myself to feel fulfilled. And once I find that, then life will feel easy or perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I believe that, like, God has put these incredible gifts inside of you, your personality, your interests, your passions, even I would say your weaknesses can expose in essence this path inside of you. And so for me, I'll give you an example. Like when I took some of the personality tests, like one of the things that I've observed about myself is, especially post college, I would sort of switch my job every 2 years. And I'm like, what is it? Like, I can't make up my mind. Like, what's wrong with me? But then when I did career counseling class, I realized I have a really high value for change and variety. So I built my profession and my practice around that principle. So I do one-on-one counseling, but I also teach online courses. I also have a podcast. And so having variety and change allows me to use my gifts and keep interested in what I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
and to feel fulfilled. And I could also use my gift in counseling in other ways. I use it in relationships, I use it, in marriage. So just because we have a specific interest or take a personality assessment doesn't mean it's a specific box that we're supposed to stay in. Whereas I look at it as a guidepost. In essence, like what is put in you is being called out of you to impact the world around you. And so if I can help you discover what's in you, then I can guide you to how to live it in the outside part of your life.
And I love also how you saw it as a positive, because some people might have seen, like you said, that you were just changing your career as seeing something, there was something wrong with you and that you needed to fix, but instead you took it as a positive quality and said, okay, how can I build a career based on this, which I think is really wonderful. And I just keeping an eye on the time because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But before we let you go, which this is just wonderful talking with you. I love your approach to counseling and to this overall holistic idea of health. Can you tell us how can people connect with you? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about like your courses and your podcast also.
Sure. So if you're interested in this idea of integrative holistic health, especially in regards to approaching counseling, I have a podcast called Life Interconnected, and we talk about how to cultivate connection within, with others, and with God. And so if you want to learn how to integrate your faith and psychology, I think that understanding how those two things connect to your physical health is really an aha moment that a lot of people have. So if you go to the podcast, you'll find episodes that I do with other like-minded doctors and practitioners. So I interview doctors about their specialty and how they view emotions and mental health impacting the body. And then I also have several episodes myself walking you through core pillars of emotional health. actually right now in the middle of doing a series to prepare for emotionally healthy holidays. It's a 3-part series. So if you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed by your family dynamics going into Thanksgiving next week and Christmas, you can check out the podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple, and then obviously on Instagram, I'm here at Life Interconnected. If you want to learn more about, we actually do have virtual options. I have other counselors who work for me. You can go to lifeinterconnected.com for more information there. The online course that I have for specifically for pregnant and postpartum moms is called Peaceful Postpartum, Emotional Wellness for Postpartum Parents. So it also integrates the dad in the equation, which is really unique. So we'll walk you through a mind, body, spirit approach to postpartum mental health and everything you can do in that second and third trimester to prepare for having a peaceful postpartum. For more information on that, you can go to peacefulpostpartum.org.
I love it. I wish I had known about it, or this had been around when I had my kids. Mine are older now, but I just think this is such a great approach for, like you said, not just for moms, but for parents or for anyone. So, and I'm definitely going to be checking out the podcast. So thank you, everybody. We're going to have the links to that when this is posted on our YouTube channel. We'll include all the direct links. You can find it there. Or if you're watching on Instagram, you can go to her Instagram profile to access all of the resources. Thank you for joining us. This is so great to talk with you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.